Today we continue on with our Calvary Chapel distinctives, and this chapter is entitled The Supremacy of Love. The Supremacy of Love. And so we're going to start with a verse, but our main text here is going to be John chapter 13. John chapter 13, specifically 1 through 5, but we're going to start. And so I'd ask you this question though, what is one of the characteristics of being a Christian that is probably the most misunderstood in today's society? Probably love. Because you have to define your terms, right? Because when I'm saying love, when I'm talking to someone and I'm saying love, I might be thinking of a different definition of love. Like, how can love mean multiple things? Well, it just does. And that's the beauty of the English language and even the Greek language, all languages out there, is that love means different things in different situations. Now, I hope, men, as you're looking and you're cherishing your bride, that you don't say that you love her in the same theme that you say you love your good pair of shoes. Hopefully, it's a little bit different, right? And if it's not, we have to have a conversation, okay? But so, we do this with language, right? When you sit there and you say good can mean multiple things. If you're like, hey, is that a good microphone that as we're testing things out, hey, is that microphone good? Are you really asking about the morality of the microphone? No, you're saying, is it useful? Right? So these words have meaning and different situations, different connotations. In fact, in the Greek language, you probably know this, but there are multiple words for love. And if you don't, that's okay. But you have multiple words for love in the Greek language. You have agape. And so if you're looking at the text and it says agape, that, they should love one another, and that word is agape, it's sacrificial love. It's unconditional love. It's the love of God towards us. But if he's saying, hey, guess what? Love that person as brotherly love. Phileo, where we get Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. It's different. And then venture to say, if you jump into the Song of Solomon, you're probably going to see the word eros, right? The word where we get the word erotic from, passionate. And so you have these different types of words. And that's important because when you and I talk about loving one another, that might mean something different to someone in the world. When you look at, all you got to do is just look at entertainment, and it might be, love means unlimited acceptance of what I do. Like, well, that's not biblical love. Biblical love is seeking the highest good for someone despite the personal cost to you, right? And so out of everything that we as followers of Jesus could be known for, we could be known for a lot of things. Had a conversation with someone this past week where we're talking and sharing the gospel, and the first thing that he said is, well, I can't believe that. Well, why can't you believe that? Because what the church did through the Crusades. Well, you know who didn't like what the church did through the Crusades either? Jesus didn't like what the church did through the Crusades. Right? And so, but you sit there, we could be known for a lot of things. Jesus says we'll be known for what? What will we as a church on the wall for me so that I know what you want from me? And then as we're thinking about it and as we're talking about it, the context of that story comes into play. And it's like, wait a minute. The only time that we have recorded the Lord writing something on the wall was a message of judgment, and that guy died that night. So let's maybe not go that far. But have you ever wondered, like, Lord, what do you want from me? Well, maybe we should start with the fundamentals. You know what he wants from us? He wants our love. He wants our love directed towards him. He wants our fellowship, and he wants us to share his love with others. He wants us to share his love with others. John 13:34, that you love one another as I have loved you. That you love one another as I have loved you. And if you look at those verses there, 34 and 35, you know what comes before that? Is Jesus is telling them that he's headed towards the cross. He's telling them that he's getting ready to leave. And so he says, I want you to love one another. And so the question becomes, and this is what I'd like to look at this morning, the question becomes, how can the Lord ask us to do such a big thing? Maybe you're thinking about that person in your mind. You're like, Lord, not that person. Like, really? You want me to love that person? Yes, he does. But I want to know how. How are we able to do this? I was talking to my buddy this morning, and I was like, you know what? I am not overly a philosophical person. I want the practicality of the situation. And so that's why I kind of tend to look at things as like, okay, love like I have loved you, which then in my mind becomes, the next question is, how? How are we to do this? How are we to do this? Simply put, in John 13, 1 through 5, following the Lord's example. And so let's look at that this morning. John chapter 13, 1 through 5. Before the Passover festival, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. One of your translations might say, to the uttermost, or to the fullest. Now when it was time for supper, now if you're in the New England churches, you're probably reading it like this. Now when it was time for supper, right? The devil had already put it into the heart of Judas, Simon Iscariot's son, to betray him. Verse 3, Jesus knew that the Father had given everything into his hands, that he had come from God and he was going back to God. So he got up from supper, laid aside his outer clothing, took a towel, tied it around himself. Now, if you're an underliner, I would underline that. I would underline verse 4 there. So he got up. And it's huge, and we'll get there. He laid aside his outer clothing, took a towel, tied it around himself. Next, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet and to dry them with the towel tied around him. And so the context here, what is going on? This is the last meal, if you will, of Christ. This is the night where he's going to be talking to his disciples. John 13, John 14, John 15, John 16. And I read through that. And if you read through that, those chapters together, do it sometime. Just sit down and read those chapters. You get this overarching picture of Jesus saying, I'm going away, but I'm not leaving you as orphans. I'm going away, but I'm coming back. I'm going away, but the Holy Spirit is coming. I'm going away, so I want you to love one another. All these different things. I'm going away, and then it culminates with, oh, by the way, you're going to have trials and tribulation, but take heart, for I have overcome the world. And then you get into John 17, where he goes into the garden and he's praying. So this is like right hours before this whole process would happen. And he speaks as though he were moving from one destination to the next. I mean, look at it. He just says, Jesus knew his hour had come to depart from this world to the Father. Like, that's as non-emotional as you get, right? But we know that he's going to the cross, that road is marked through the cross. Later on in chapter 13, we'll see that Jesus is distressed, and probably rightfully so, because he knows what's coming. But he simply just speaks like he's just going from one destination to the next. And so our text this morning, verses 1 through 3, being God, Jesus knew, or what Jesus knew. What Jesus knew. And so what kept him here? What kept him on earth? What kept him being able to willingly embrace the cross? Well, I would submit to you this morning, you know what kept him here? His love for us. In fact, if you look at Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2, it says, keeping our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer, perfecter of our faith, for the joy set before him, for the joy that lay before him, he endured the cross, despising its shame, and sat at the right hand of the throne of God. For the joy. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought what the joy was that allowed the Lord to continue going through this cross, going to the cross, knowing that he could at any minute call down angels? At any minute, he could say, you know what, I'm done with this. At any minute, he could be like, you know what? I created this world. I'm going to uncreate it real quick. He could have done it. But for the joy, you know what that joy is? I submit to you this morning, it's you. It's me. It's the souls of the humanity that would be brought to him through the cross. So his love for his people, his redemption for his people. So he knew, all right, so what Jesus knew. A couple things here. He knew what he came to do. Look, he said, knowing what the Father had given everything into his hand. All right, so we'll go back though. He had come to depart from this world to the Father. That he had come from God in verse 3 and that he was going back to God. He knew what his mission was. He knew where he was headed. He knew that these next hours, this next day, he'd be hanging on a cross. He'd be whipped and beaten. And as the Passover lamb was being slain in Jerusalem, so the Passover lamb would be hanging on a cross. He knew what he came to do. But not only that, and this helps, right? Knowledge helps us. So he knew what he came to do. He knew what the mission was. But he also knew who he was. He also knew who he was. He was one who had all authority. Jesus knew that the Father had given everything into his hands. He knew who he was. Some of us, myself included, just need to know who we are. And you know who you are today? A child of the King. A son, a daughter of God. Don't let the enemy mess with you. So many times the enemy will be like, yeah, well, look what you did. You ever thought about how many times the enemy probably attacked Paul? Like, the Lord's going to use you. I mean, you were the guy that was holding the coats of the people that were stoning the martyr, Stephen. Why would he possibly use you? There's no way. I think that's why maybe sometimes, I'm getting off topic here, but it's okay. I think that's why sometimes we see Paul writing, Paul, an apostle called by God. Jesus knew who he was. Do you know who you are this morning? Because that helps us love others. Not only did he know who he was, but he knew who would abandon him. Here, before he even sits down or gets up to serve, he knows that these people, that these disciples would take off. He tells Peter, Peter, you're going to deny me. He tells Judas, go do what you're going to do. He knows that he's going to be abandoned, and yet he still serves them. So for me, it'd be like, I'll wash maybe, how many we have? 12 here? Okay, so I'll wash maybe a third of y'all's. But he knew that what was going to happen. He knew who would abandon him. But he also knew, check this out, verse 3 here. He also knew where he came from and where he was going. He also knew where he came from. He said, Jesus knew that the Father had given everything into his hands, that he had come from God, and that he was going back to God. So he gets up. He knows where he came from. And he knows where he's going. He knows that the cross is not the end. And all of this knowledge allows him, I would submit to you, allows him and spurs him to serve, which is a good example for you and I. But back in verse 1, it says that Jesus loved his own. Jesus loved his own, and so I'd submit to how did Jesus love his own? How had he shown love towards them? How does he show love towards us? Well, he called them. He called the disciples. He wasn't fit to let Levi hanging out in the tax collector booth. He said, Levi, let's go. Let's go. He wasn't fit to let Peter, James, and John, and Andrew hang out fishing. He said, let's go follow me. He called them to fellowship, to following him. But not only did he call them to follow him, but he also poured into them. He taught them. Have you ever been there? Have you ever been with, and maybe it doesn't need to be like all, butterflies and flattery, but have you ever sat under someone who has poured into you and you have just felt like you've just received love? Because sometimes we get into the place where like, do you even know who I am? Do you even know what's going on in my life? Do you even know? And, the Lord, he does know. And when people pour into us, when people pour into you, that's them giving up their time to talk to you, to pour into you, to disciple you. Jesus did that with them. But he also taught them. He protected them. You know what he also did? He empowered them. He said, go. I'm gonna empower you to do this. Man. So Jesus, all these things are what? Jesus showing his love for them. Jesus showing his love for you. for me. Hasn't he done the same for us? And really, it says he loved them to the end, or meaning to the uttermost, to the fullest. But this one author, this one commentator would say here that in this section of Scripture, Jesus reveals his sacrificial love through his service, through his teaching, and ultimately through his death. And Wiersbe would write this, that what Jesus knew helped determine what Jesus did. So what did Jesus do in verses 4 through 5 this morning? He got up from supper, laid aside his outer clothing, took a towel, tied it around himself. Next, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, to dry them with a towel tied around them. So he does what? He serves. He serves his disciples, knowing who he was, knowing that they would abandon him, knowing that they would betray him, knowing that they would fail. You know, he tells Peter that. He says, when you fail, right, essentially, come back, Peter. Come back, Peter. But knowing all this, he got up and served. I mean, I love that picture. The God of the universe, the one who's sitting on the throne of heaven and earth, got up. He didn't have to. He could have just sat there and been like, all right, disciples, check it out. You need to serve people. You need to go do this thing. That's not what he said. He said that. He tells them later in John chapter 13, this is why I did this, to show you. But he gets up. And I wonder, sitting there for a moment, just picture it. You're with Jesus. It's a Passover meal. You're sitting there, and Jesus gets up. Now, you might be sitting there and be like, okay, whatever, Master just got up. Now, maybe maybe his fork fell on the floor and he needs to get a new one. Or, there's 100 different reasons why Jesus could have gotten up. And so Jesus gets up, but he takes off his outer clothing. He takes out his robe, if you will. And now you're like, this is interesting. I don't know, maybe he's hot. Maybe he's hot up in there. So he just takes off his sport coat. But then he does what? He ties a towel to himself. Now, if you're in that moment, you're probably like, what's going on? Because, you're dealing with people's feet here, right? That's not a great thing to deal with. And Jesus would serve them. Jesus would wash their feet. Just think about that, right? One time at Liberty, we were at a chapel service. I don't know if it was around Easter or whatever, but they did a foot washing thing, right? They wanted people to wash each other's feet, and it was all well and cool and everything, but they didn't have bowls of water. They didn't have bowls of water and towels. You know what they had? Clorox wipes. Like, we're going to do this, but we're going to do this as sanitary as possible, okay? But Jesus, the God of heaven and earth, gets up, takes off, or empties himself, as Philippians 2 talks about, of his glory, ties a towel around himself, unites himself to humanity, and serves. He does the job of a servant. He does the job of a servant. He was humbled, or he was humble. I was looking through, as I was reading through this text this morning, I was reading through the NLT version. There's Abby's Bible at the house. And so this quote is from her. I'm not sure if she quoted it or just wrote it down, but in the margin was there, humility is not dependent on the action of those being served. Think about that. Humility. Jesus was humble. And humility was not dependent, his humility, his service was not dependent on the actions of those being served. Because sometimes the actions of those being served aren't the most gracious, are they? That doesn't matter, does it? Because God has told us to serve. God has told us to serve. So why didn't they serve? Why didn't any of the disciples be like, no, Master, let me do this? Why didn't any of them sit there in the building, be like, hey, maybe one of us should wash each other's feet. That would be a cool thing to do. Well, Luke 22 tells us probably because of a pride issue. Because after this event, or right before this event, Jesus is talking about service, and what do the disciples get into? Who's greater than the next? You could just see the exasperation of Christ, being like, are you serious? So why didn't they do this? What hindered them from doing this? Probably their pride. And what hinders us from serving others? Probably our pride, if we think about it. That can be manifested in a number of different ways. And you don't know my schedule? I've got stuff to do. Pride, So what's the application for us this morning? How do we love others so that the world will know that we belong to Jesus, that we belong to Christ? Well, simply put, we follow the example of Christ. We follow his example. 1 John chapter 2, verse 5 and 6 says, but whoever keeps his word, truly in him the love of God is made complete. This is how we know we are in him. Verse 6, the one who says he remains in him should walk as he walked. I'm sure you've heard it. You destroyer of nations, you have been cut down to the ground. You said to yourself, I will ascend to the heavens. I will set up my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the mount of the God's assembly in the remotest parts of the north. I will ascend above the highest clouds. Now listen to this. I will make myself like the Most High. Contrast that to what Jesus is doing here, the God of heaven and earth, taking off his outer robe, taking off his glory, and saying, I'm going to serve you. So you should be serving others as well. We should be serving others as well in a humble state and not being prideful. We don't let pride get in our way. Not only do we not let pride get in our way, but we don't let our differences get in the way of what unifies us. We don't let our differences get in the way of what unifies us. What unifies us? Christ, the Spirit. In fact, writing to, and if you've ever read through, or if you haven't read through C.S. Lewis's book, The Screwtape Letters, I would encourage you to read through it, pick it up. It's something I believe that the Lord just gave this man such an insight into just really the demonic world. And then he writes this book called Screwtape Letters, which is really, if you don't know what it is, it's this, higher up demon kind of guy writing to his tempter nephew who's in charge of this person, tempting this person. And so they're going back and forth. But why do I say this? We don't let our differences get in the way of what unifies us. This is Wormwood Screwtape writing to Wormwood. Okay, and he says this. Be sure that the patient, meaning the person that Wormwood is tempting, be sure that the patient remains completely fixated. Now, I'm just going to preface this here. This was written, I believe, in the 40s, right? So keep that in mind as we walk through this. Be sure that the patient remains completely fixated on politics, arguments, political gossip, and obsessing on the faults of people they have never met. Serves as an excellent distraction from advancing in personal virtue, character, and the things the patient can control. Make sure to keep the patient in a constant state of angst, frustration, general disdain towards the rest of the human race in order to avoid any kind of charity or inner peace from further developing. Ensure the patient continues to believe that the problem is out there in the broken system, rather than recognizing there is a problem with himself. Sounds like he could have written that yesterday. Yep. We don't let our differences, we don't let our differences get in the way of what unifies us. And we can, and it can hinder our serving one another. We become active in our service. We become active in our service. Look what Jesus did. He got up. He took off. He put on. He poured water. He washed. These are all action words. These are all things that Jesus did. He wasn't just sitting around saying, this is what you should do. This is what you could do. This is how you should do this. He does this. He gets up. He does something. We should do something. Our love towards one another should be active. 1 John 3, 17 and 18. 1 John 3, 17 and 18 says, if anyone has this world's goods and sees a fellow believer in need but withholds compassion from him, How does God's love reside in him? Little children, let us not love in word or speech, but in action and in truth. Think about it. When's the last time you've done something for someone? It doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be, and you go within your giftings. I'm not the most, handy guy out there when it comes to home projects. For the better part of the summer, it looked like World War I trench warfare in our backyard because we had these drainage issues. So we had ditches running through and, 45 trips to Lowe's back and forth, actually Home Depot. And it wasn't that many, right? But I remember in 2006, the church that I was a part of, up at my home church back home, we went to help I believe it was in Gulfport, I'm not sure the city, but it was after Katrina. And we went down there as a church to help out this church that had gotten destroyed. And I'm like, you know what? You probably don't want me out there measuring things and trying to, because I'll measure maybe, I say measure once, or I'll measure maybe half a time and then or eyeball it and figure it out, and it won't work out well, right? Anyone been there? Okay, no? All right, well, just me. But I may not be able to do all these things, but you know what I can do? I can lift things up and put them down. You tell me to hold some drywall in place, and I'll hold some drywall in place. So what can you do? You might not be able to do all these crazy, fantastic things, but didn't Jesus say, if you give someone a cup of water, if you visit someone? So what can we do as a church? We be active. And then I love this. We see people like Jesus saw them. Jesus knew the heart of these men, and yet he still serves them. We see people like Jesus saw them. How can we truly see them? Through compassion and understanding. Matthew chapter 9, verses 35 through 38, we get Jesus looking at the crowd. Jesus looking at the crowd. And what does he do? He said, continued going around to all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom, healing every disease of every sickness. So that's what he was doing. But look at this. He says, when he saw the crowds, he felt compassion on them. Why? Because they were distressed and dejected, like sheep without a shepherd. Now listen, we can see the craziness in the world, and it is crazy, and it is evil, and it is not good. But we should still be seeing people through the eyes of Jesus, with compassion and understanding. Again, we check our attitudes. We don't hate. You think of just read through, how can I love someone? Well, just read through the Sermon on the Mount. Be that kind of person. Be that kind of Christian. Chuck Smith would write, get to know them, talking of people. Get to know them. Get to understand where their thorn is, what's irritating them. If you seek to understand them, then as you have compassion, you can truly minister to them. Now, that doesn't negate the consequences of what someone's reaction is. But sometimes someone reacts a certain way, and we get all bristly, and we get all righteous or self-righteous sometimes, and maybe we just sit there and just say, what is going on that made you act like this? Not to say that that's excusable, but I just want to know what's happening. And so there's a video we're going to show. It's about a 40-second video, and I just want you to watch this guy's reaction to throwing trash away. Give us a second as just watch his reaction. You can mute that, Keith, yeah. You can just keep it muted back there. So it's just that's what you're going to get. At least he's picking up the mail. All right. So we laugh at that, right? And I'm sure there was some sort of federal law that was broken there. And I use this video because I was going through a seminar, sharing hope in crisis. And they use that video. And he says, we look at that and we say, wow, that guy, that was probably an overreaction. Probably. But you don't know the text message he got 30 seconds ago, right? You don't know the phone call that he got a minute and a half ago that said maybe someone had cancer. Maybe someone had just died. Maybe something had happened. And if we just sit there, now listen, don't justify, like that doesn't justify what took place. But if we have some understanding, maybe we could be like, how can we help? Are we seeing people through the compassion of Jesus or just through their behavior? So, in conclusion, where do we go from here? Well, we know our mission. What is our mission? We are ambassadors for Christ. We are armed with the message of reconciliation to a dying and a lost world that is hellbound. Our mission is to make disciples. We know who people are. We know that they are broken, that they are sinful, that we are broken and sinful. That apart from Christ, we die in our sin and are separated from Him. We know who people are. We know where we came from. Have you thought about that? We know where we came from, that at some point before the Lord called you, guess what you were? Guess what I was? An enemy of the cross. Yet God in His mercy. And you know what? We know where we came from, but we know where we're going. Through the blood of Jesus, there's hope. And so armed with that knowledge, we as a church, we remain humble in our attitude towards one another. This video, we remain humble. We sit there and be like, bro, what was going on? Right? Now, maybe it was just a complete overreaction and you should be fired, right? But maybe there's something deeper going on that led to the behavior. So we, armed with the knowledge of what our mission is, who people are, where we came from, where we're headed, we remain humble in our attitude towards one another. We get up and serve someone. You get up and you go serve someone. However the Lord leads you. Take someone out for a cup of coffee. Take someone out, meet someone, just go hang out with someone. But go do something as a church. And we seek to understand and show compassion towards others. Jesus says, back in John 13:35, by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. So how are you doing today loving others?